Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy our second installment, part 2 of Thriving Black Communities Prior to Integration.
Black Bottom was a predominantly black neighborhood in Detroit. It was located on Detroit's Near East Side. This was another thriving black neighborhood with over 100,000 so-called African American residents and businesses that was similar to Black Wall Street in Tulsa. Did you hear that? Let me repeat that. This predominantly black neighborhood known as Black Bottom rivaled that of Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tulsa was definitely not the only very successful thriving black community during that time. Though by the 1950s, migration transformed Hastings and St. Antoine Street into the city's major African American community of black-owned businesses, social institutions, and nightclubs nationally famous for its music scene in Paradise Valley. Hastings Street is also where Aretha Franklin's father, the Reverend C.L. Franklin, first opened his new Bethel Baptist Church. Businesses included 10 restaurants, 8 grocery stores, 17 physicians, and 6 drugstores, Barthwell Drugs being one of the most well-known enterprises. What happened, you may ask? Well, urban renewal efforts in the 1950s displaced many residents to other areas of the city. Michigan demolished for redevelopment in the late 1950s to early 1960s and replaced with the Lafayette Park residential district and a freeway. Do you think this was a coincidence? It's peculiar how so many black thriving communities were demolished, destroyed, burned to the ground, or had parks and lakes built over them. This was not a coincidence.
You know, as we research these thriving black neighborhoods, we find that it's a common thread and a common theme that goes through all of these neighborhoods that were thriving prior to integration. It seems that these neighborhoods were purposely destroyed, and the progress of these black thriving neighborhoods just a few generations after slavery was purposely destroyed. And as we said in our previous videos, this is a subject that we will explore even deeper on our Patreon as we get ready to launch it, because some subjects is just not conducive for this platform.
7th Street in West Oakland became a prosperous area around the time of World War II. Black Americans moved to Oakland by the masses due to war-related jobs and other opportunities, such as becoming Pullman porters. For those of you who may be unfamiliar, a Pullman porter was basically like a bellhop or a maid or a waiter, but
these men worked the sleeper cars and they brought dignity to that position. Those positions helped sustain the black communities because during that time, the service industry was an industry that black people dominated. Can you say black jobs? Some people just can't stop living in the past.
Black Americans created black-owned businesses for residents to support and buy black, which in turn laid the groundwork to help the economy thrive. Businesses such as Sylvester Sims Overland Cafe, Slim Jenkins Club, Esther's Orbit Room, The Barn, and the Lincoln Theater helped West Oakland become a cultural hub for black entrepreneurs and talent during the 1940s. The jazz and blues scenes were so prominent in the area that musicians such as Nat King Cole and B.B. King would travel to clubs to perform, and the West Coast blues sound began to emerge. West Oakland was the West Coast epicenter for black Americans, providing them the opportunity to embed their Southern roots and talents into the DNA of the city. Jackson Ward, Richmond, Virginia. Nicknamed the Harlem of the South, Richmond's Jackson Ward was a cultural, entertainment, and economic hub for black residents. Thousands of black Americans moved to the area that is now a historic district after the Civil War to create better lives for themselves and to start businesses. The prosperous area was home to many well-known churches and the first black and woman-owned bank in the country, St. Luke Penny Savings, which was founded by entrepreneur and monumental figure Maggie L Walker. Jackson Ward had a successful, self-sufficient economy where black entrepreneurs established financial institutions, stores, medical practices, and much, much more. Jackson Ward also had a thriving entertainment scene where musicians such as Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, and Bill Bojangles Robinson would visit. The district unfortunately began to decline in the 1950s, but its heritage and history is still preserved to this day. The community was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1976 and is also designated as a National Historic Landmark.
Now, a little about the aforementioned Maggie L. Walker. At the turn of the century, Maggie Lena Walker was one of the foremost female business leaders in the United States. She gained national prominence when she became the first woman to own a bank in the United States. This bears repeating. Maggie Lena Walker became the first woman to own a bank in the United States of America. Just think about this, folks. A few generations after slavery, this woman built her own bank. As we always say, if they could do it then, we can do it now. We have no excuse. Now, Mrs. Walker's entrepreneurial skills transformed black business practices while also inspiring other women to enter the field. She was born to enslaved parents on July 15, 1864 in Richmond, Virginia. After the Civil War, her mother worked as a laundress and her father as a butler in the popular Richmond Hotel. Miss Walker attended a local school in Richmond, Virginia, and upon graduation began teaching. She stepped down from her teaching after marrying a successful brickmaker. When Walker was 14 years old, she joined the Independent Order of St. Luke's, an African-American benevolent organization that helped the sick and elderly in Richmond. Within the organization, Walker held many high-ranking positions. In 1902, she began publishing the organization's newspaper, the St. Luke Herald. She encouraged African Americans in Richmond to harness their economic power by establishing their own institutions through newspaper. This amazing woman focused her efforts on accounting and math. Her first business endeavor was a community insurance company for women. From there, she continued her entrepreneurial pursuits. In 1903, she founded the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank. Walker, again, was the first woman of any race to charter a bank in the United States. The bank was a powerful representation of black self-help in a segregated South. The Penny Savings Bank not only attracted adults, but Walker worked to appeal to children by passing out banks which encouraged them to save their money. Now listen to this, folks. How many of us know this history? How many of us know our history? Well, by 1924, the Penny Savings Bank had spread to other parts of Virginia and included more than 50,000 members. While other banks collapsed during the Great Depression, St. Luke's Penny Saving survived. The bank eventually consolidated into two other large banks and moved to the downtown Richmond area. And this bank is still in operation today. Now, I don't know about you, but I think Mrs. Maggie L. Walker's name should be known as well as any other person in our experience. Mrs. Walker is quoted as having said, "First, we need a savings bank. Let us put our monies together. Let us use our monies. Let us put our money out as usury among ourselves and reap the benefits ourselves. Let us have a bank that will take the nickels and turn them into dollars." Miss Maggie Lena Walker, a name we all should know from the Jackson Ward section of Richmond, Virginia. Have you ever heard of Central Park?
Before Central Park was created, there was a thriving black community called Seneca Village, a community of predominantly so-called African Americans, many of whom owned property. By 1855, the village consisted of approximately 225 residents, made up of roughly 2/3 African Americans. Seneca Village began in 1825 when landowners in the area subdivided their land and sold it as 200 lots. A man by the name of Andrew Williams, a 25-year-old African-American shoe shiner, bought the first 3 lots for $125. Epiphany Davis, a store clerk, bought 12 lots for $579. And the AME Zion Church purchased another 6 lots. From there, a community was born. By the early 1830s, there were approximately 10 homes in the village. Compared to other blacks living in New York at the time, residents of Seneca Village were more stable and prosperous. By 1855, approximately half of them owned their own homes. With property ownership came other rights not commonly held by African Americans in the city, namely the right to vote. The fact that many residents were property owners contradicts some common misconceptions during the mid-19th century. Most lived in 2-story homes.
And most worked in black-owned establishments. Yes, Central Park in New York City was once a predominantly black, thriving town. And we must remember, never forget, that in these thriving, predominantly black towns, the dollar circulated 36 to 100 times before leaving the community. No other community has ever been able to duplicate that type of circulation before or since. Many of us have seen the movie Rosewood. Well, if you haven't, I urge you, please view the movie. Because before the massacre, the town of Rosewood had been a quiet, predominantly black, self-sufficient whistle stop for the Seaboard Airline Railway. 2 black families in Rosewood named Goins and Carrier were the most powerful. The Goins family brought the turpentine industry to the area, and in the years preceding the attacks were the second largest landowners in Levy County. The Carriers were also a large family, predominantly working at lodging in the region. The population of Rosewood peaked in 1915. By the 1920s, the residents of Rosewood were mostly self-sufficient. They had 3 churches, a school, a large Masonic hall, a turpentine mill, a sugarcane mill, a baseball team named the Rosewood Stars, and 2 general stores. The village of Rosewood had 2-story wooden planked homes, other small 2-room houses, and several small unoccupied plank farms and storage structures. Some families owned pianos, organs, and other symbols of middle-class prosperity. Survivors of Rosewood remember it as a happy place. And in 1995, survivor Roby Morton recalled at age 79 that when she was a child there, that Rosewood was a town where everyone's house was painted. There were roses everywhere you walked, hence the name Rosewood. So you see, folks, there were other towns, thriving black successful towns during the time of Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was not the only Black Wall Street in America. It's perhaps the most famous, but black people had no choice but to look within. And during the time immediately preceding slavery, our people thrived. Why? Because we had no choice. And it was not just in any particular area. In fact, it was every area. Now, what happened to those towns? Again, this is something that we're working on researching and developing, and that we will be rolling out because it is a story that needs to be told. We need to know who we are. We are more than just what we are being portrayed in the media. We are more than what we think we are. And perhaps if we can get back to realizing who we are, we will begin to do what our ancestors did prior to this condition that we're in now. If they could do it then, we can do it now. We also would like to emphasize that these thriving black successful communities did it on their own. There was no help from the government. There was no reparations. There was no 40 acres and a mules. And despite popular belief, there were no government handouts. And back then, We know that there was a saying in the black community which bears repeating. We had to work twice as hard to get half as much. And that attitude drove us to excellence. And this is not the time to be complacent. We need to get on our grind. We need to grind and we need to do for self. If it was never clear before, it has to be clear that there's no one that's going to help us but us. We are the answer to our own issues. We need to solve our problem, nobody else. Just like every other community on the planet, our survival depends on us. And as we know, there are those who would like to erase our history and take our history out of schools and just out of memory. The fact of the matter is, it is up to us to tell our own story, to set the record straight. And please stay tuned because we will be doing more on this series because there are over 100 different communities that black people established in the years following slavery. Many of them, as a matter of fact, the majority of them were doing quite well. So when left alone, our people thrived. We'd also like to make it very clear that we are not leaving the YouTube platform. We're simply expanding with our Patreon because there are certain subjects that are just not conducive to this platform. The Black Excellence and Abundance channel, where black history is every day. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And remember, thou art rich.